to say, well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, everyone coming in from anywhere in the world on Zoom live and then watching afterwards tonight. At the Mars Society UK students, we are very incredibly privileged to be joined by Dr. Robert Zubrin, founder of the Mars Society. Kind of in advertising this talk, you fail to manage to fit into a blurb all of his different kind of achievements over the course of a very illustrious career. So we're just very pleased to be welcomed by effectively the preeminent mind in the cause for advocating the Martian exploration cause. So if, Dr. Zubrin, please take it away.
Okay, so I'm going to talk some about humans to Mars, but I'm going to give a broader overview, more corresponding to the discussion that I presented in my book, The Case for Space, which is my most recent book. And that book is subtitled The Case for Space: How the Revolution in Spaceflight Opens a Future of Unlimited Possibilities. So that's a lot to talk about in a short space of time, but I'm going to try to touch on the main point. First, the revolution. I think most people in this audience are aware of it. We're having a revolution in spaceflight right now. It's an entrepreneurial-led revolution. It's spearheaded by SpaceX, but it is not limited by any stretch of the imagination to SpaceX. But to focus for the moment on SpaceX, what Elon Musk and his incredible team have managed to do is not only cut the cost of space launch by a factor of 5 in the past 10 years, when it had been flat without any reduction for the previous 40, okay, but and introducing a variety of novel and very useful spaceflight systems, they've proven a broader point, which is that it is possible for a well-led entrepreneurial team to do things that previously thought it took the governments of major powers to do. And not only that, do it in 1/3 the time at 1/10 the cost or less, and even do things that they had deemed entirely impossible altogether. And this is revolutionizing the picture in space launch. It is in the process of revolutionizing the picture in spacecraft, and it has launched a revolution in a number of other very important fields, as I'll mention notably, for instance, fusion power, which is now getting entrepreneurial funding. And there's a number of projects, including, for instance, in the UK, Tokamak Energy, which in my view, it and a number of competing projects are all likely to achieve fusion ignition well before ITER is ever turned on. And this is so even because Musk himself has no interest in fusion. His favorite alternate energy source is solar energy. But nevertheless, by proving this point to the value of entrepreneurial initiatives, he raised the question among investors. Perhaps the problem with fusion was the same problem with reusable space launch vehicles. That is, not primarily a technical problem, but really an organizational problem, that the wrong people, the wrong kind of organization is doing it. And therefore, these entrepreneurial fusion programs have gotten serious investment, hundreds of millions of dollars. In one case, TAE Fusion, $800 million. But to return to space, okay, so you've got Musk, okay, his Falcon line has cut the cost of space launch by a factor of 5, but he's not satisfied with that. He is right now, as we speak, working rapidly to develop an even more revolutionary system, the Starship. Falcons are mostly reusable. Starship will be fully reusable. The Falcons are medium lift vehicles. The Starship is going to be a heavy lift vehicle, heavy lift, fully reusable, comparable capability to a Saturn V moon rocket, but 1% the launch cost. This, I mean, well, first of all, he's moving to make his own launchers obsolete, which is unheard of up till now in the aerospace industry. But the thing is, Musk knows that there are people hot on his path. I happen to know that there's at least 5 entrepreneurial space companies in China who have investment money, who have who are working on developing vehicles that look a lot like Falcon 9s, frankly, and there's no question that they'll succeed, or one or more of them will succeed in doing it, because Musk has shown that it can be done. And once people know something can be done, the law of physics are available to everyone. And that was the secret of the atom bomb, that it worked. Once that was known, anyone could develop it, and many countries have. And it's the same with reusable space launch. And so Musk wants to be able to introduce Starship in a couple of years, because by then there'll be other people that have vehicles comparable to his current Falcons, and he's going to have to keep moving ahead. So space launch is going to get cheaper and cheaper, and the cheaper it gets, well, first of all, there'll be more space launches if space launch is cheaper, and spacecraft designers will be able to be less conservative. For the past 50 years, the standing wisdom among spacecraft designers has been, don't use anything that hasn't been used before. Because if your launch is going to cost you $1 billion, you're not going to want to introduce some new technology to save $50 million on your spacecraft. You're not. You don't want to risk the whole spacecraft, which is costing you $1 billion anyway, for some improvement that in the end you could live without. Well, but if the launch costs $10 million, then saving $50 million on the spacecraft counts for a lot. And furthermore, there are other things you're just willing to take chances on for higher performance. Let's say it's not a monetary savings. Let's say it's a performance enhancement. You're willing to do it. So spacecraft are going to become cheaper, and they're going to become more effective rapidly in conjunction with the cheapening of space launch. Okay. And the cheaper spacecraft become, once again, the larger the market will be for space launch. So this is a virtuous improvement cycle that has been set in motion here. Now, this opens up all sorts of possibilities. Orbital research laboratories, orbital industries, orbital hotels, all these things people kind of started talking about when the space shuttle came along, but they frankly didn't really make sense commercially. If your launch vehicle was the space shuttle, it cost $1 billion to launch, and it could only lift 20 tons to orbit. But if it's 10 million a launch and it lifts 100 tons to orbit, the numbers are, what is that? 500 times better. And that really can improve a business plan. So we'll have those things. Also, surface-to-surface travel, long distance, London to Australia in less than an hour. Surface-to-surface travel with expendable rockets is a non-starter, but with reusable rockets, it becomes discussable. And, there were 100 satellite launches last year in the world, roughly, much more than 100 satellites, because SpaceX has been launching them 60 at a time, but 100 actual launches or so. But there's hundreds of intercontinental flights every hour. And so if you can open up that market, you really have a greatly expanded market for space flight vehicles. And, surface-to-surface travel, space has been compared to the ocean. And for the past 3,000 years, people have made a lot of money on the ocean, some by actually trying to extract wealth from the ocean, for example, by fishing. But actually much bigger business by far has been simply using the ocean as a low drag medium to travel from one port to another, vastly larger business than fishing. And the space is an ocean of zero drag medium connecting every point on Earth to every other point on Earth. And so I think we're going to see this as well. Okay, and then now this makes possible not just exploration of the moon and Mars, but the settlement. And that is and this, of course, is Musk's goal. The Starship is designed to support the settlement of Mars. You could get by with a lot less economical system if your goal was exploration. You could do it within NASA's budget using even SLSs. You could do Mars exploration provided you had a rational plan like Mars Direct. But if you want to settle, while the space agencies would jump on any opportunity to send people to Mars at a cost of $100 million each, a settler doesn't have $100 million. A settler might have several $100,000. And in fact, in equivalent terms, that's about what it costs to travel from England to North America in the 16 and 1700s. That is, a middle-class person, such as, for instance, the Puritans were, could buy one-way passage by selling their farm. So you think of selling a house now, the kind of money you might get by selling your house, several $100,000 perhaps, depends on the house, of course. And a working man by mortgaging his labor for 7 years, at $45,000 a year times 7 years, it's $300,000. That was the kind of money that people spent to travel one way from England to America in the colonial period. It's the kind of money that somebody, a reasonable cross-section of society can spend if they're willing to cash in their chips in order to move. And that's what you need for Mars settlement. And the Starship is designed to make that possible. Now, I personally have voiced the opinion that I think we'd be better off with two classes of Starship, the big one that Musk is designing and a smaller one that I call the mini Starship, sized about the right size to be an upper stage on a Falcon 9. Would have maybe 20 tons to orbit capability instead of 100, but it'd be much easier to fly back from Mars to Earth. It would take much less propellant for the return trip. The Starship is designed to use methane oxygen propellant, which we can make on Mars out of Mars water and Mars CO2. There's water on Mars. It's in the form of ice, but it's there. But I would just as soon have to make 150 tons of propellant instead of 750 tons of propellant for the return trip. Musk, however, only wants to develop one thing, and so he's going for the full-size Starship. And his argument is it will have the payload capability to build an ISRU plant on the scale required. And there it is. One could critique the plan, but it's like World War II buffs. Some say the Allies should not have landed in Normandy. They should have landed in Brittany or Calais or the Netherlands or wherever. And there were people at the time who had various opinions as well. But once the decision was made to land in Normandy, that's where the war had to be won. And it's the same with Starship. You could argue that it'd be better off also having a smaller Starship, but he's going to do it with the big Starship, and that's how we're going to do it. This thing is moving rapidly. Musk says he'll reach orbit this year. I actually doubt that, but I think there's a very good chance that Musk will be, Starship will reach orbit next year, and certainly by the year after that. So this is a happening thing. And these reusable launch vehicles, and as I say, there's going to be competitors. And, if Starship is flying by 2024, there will be other companies with Starships of their own flying them by 2028. And so the pressure will be on to continue to reduce the cost and increase the capabilities. And this means, yes, we're going to be settling Mars. We're going to be doing all sorts of other things in space, including gigantic astronomical projects, and who knows. Okay, so just want to spend a couple minutes explaining why I think this is also important, that this happened, and why it's great that it's happening, and why we should make sure that no one gets in the way of it happening. There's 4 reasons why we need to become a spacefaring species. One is for the knowledge, the second is for the challenge, the third is for our survival, and the fourth is for the future. talk about the knowledge. There's a whole universe of things to be learned about out there. I mean, just start with astronomy. There's no better place to do astronomy than space. We've learned most of what we know about physics from astronomy. I mean, Newton's laws, classical physics, the law of gravitation came from astronomy. Much of electromagnetism came from astronomy, relativity from astronomy, nuclear fusion from astronomy. And, you know, there's no wonder that this has been the case, because the universe is the best lab that there is. It's the biggest, it's the best. And when we become true spacefarers, you know, here's Hubble, it's a 2.5 meter telescope. What will we discover when we're able to build 250 meter telescopes and 2.5 kilometer telescopes, which we'll be able to do once we have true access to space? Learning about biology, which is one of the things we can learn about by going to Mars. Early Earth and early Mars were twins. They're both warm, wet, carbon dioxide atmosphere planets. Life appeared on Earth virtually as soon as it could. Did it also appear on Mars virtually as soon as it could? That is the development of life from chemistry, a process that occurs with high probability wherever you have the right physical and chemical conditions. We're going to find this out by going to Mars, but also, does that process necessarily lead to the form of life that we have? Or could it be vastly different? I mean, there's a priori arguments why life should use carbon and water as its main building blocks, but the amino acids that we use are very idiosyncratic. You know, DNA and RNA is a very specific alphabet for conveying information from one generation to another. Now, okay, we speak English, we use the Latin alphabet, and so do the French and the Spanish, the Germans, even the Poles, because they were all either part of the Roman Empire or part of the Roman Church at one time. But if you go a little further, okay, you go to Russia, the alphabet's different, although it still uses the same fundamental principles as the Latin alphabet, and even the Arabic and Hebrew alphabets, while vastly different, use the same principle of sounding out words with letters. But the Chinese alphabet does not have a common origin that all the previous alphabets, I mean, the Hebrew alphabet, the Arabic alphabet, Cyrillic, Latin, they all are ultimately based on the Phoenician alphabet, but the Chinese alphabet isn't, and it's not based on the same set of principles. It's not based on sound, it's based on pictures. Yet you can do the same thing with it. You can write books. So the question of life and the information systems that are possible for life to use, they could be much more diverse than the Latin alphabet of RNA and DNA. And so we're going to find out things that are fundamental to the nature of life and biological information systems by going out into space. And the applications of understanding new laws of physics, of understanding the true laws of biology, could be phenomenal in every field, ranging from energy production to medicine. And so, you know, this is worth doing. Second, I mentioned is the challenge. I think that societies are like individuals. We grow when we challenge ourselves. We stagnate when we do not. And, you know, the United States had a bold space program in the 60s when I was growing up. And as a result of that, we doubled the number of science graduates in our country. I was one of them. And I happened to be unusual in that group, that I actually ended up working in the space program, but the rest of them went off and did the computer revolution. And the world's never been the same. Intellectual capital is the basis of progress. And a Humans to Mars program in this day and age would have vastly more impact than the Apollo program had. The communications are much better. The opportunities in the space program are much better. It's not just limited to boys as it was in the 60s. It's boys and girls now, and then people from different minorities, and then just the ability to get the word out, the ability to inspire people with these things is so much greater. I think the payback would be enormous in this way. Then there's our survival. You know, Carl Sagan, who I knew, used to say that all species either become spacefaring or extinct. And this is because the Earth is in space, and everything in space is moving around at very high velocities and occasionally crashing into each other. during which time the smaller objects are completely destroyed and the larger objects take a hell of a bash. And this, of course, has caused mass extinctions on the Earth in the past, and will do again in the future, unless we gain control of this flight traffic. So just to be clear, I am not in accord with the people who say we need to go to space so that when the Earth is destroyed by an asteroid, there'll be some survivors somewhere else. I don't believe in that. I don't believe we should go into space to desert the Earth. We go into space to protect the Earth. By becoming spacefaring, we're able to protect the Earth, and only by becoming spacefaring will we be able to protect the Earth. And then finally, there's the issue of the future. Now, the future comes in two types, which is the ultimate, the far future, and then there's the near future, the future that we are anticipating experiencing ourselves in the relatively near term. So let's talk about the far future first, because in a certain sense that's more important than the near future. Okay, if we do what we can do in our time, which is establish that first human foothold on Mars, then humanity becomes spacefaring. And then 300 years from now, there will not only be new nations on Mars, but on thousands of planets orbiting thousands of stars in this region of the galaxy. That's what becoming spacefaring means. New nations with new languages, new customs, new literatures, all sorts of contributions to science and technology, and ideas on human social organization. Exchanging these ideas, creating an enormous interstellar engine for progress of inconceivable dimensions, as grand in comparison to our present predicament as our present global civilization is compared to our origin as a bunch of tribes in the Kenyan Rift Valley. Okay, that's what it means. It's something truly grand and magnificent, and if you have it in your power to create something grand and magnificent, then you should. Okay, but the implications of this is not just for the far future. Okay, it also affects the near future, because how you conceive of the far future affects what you're going to do in the near future. And I mean, look, okay, humanity is in danger right now. We're in danger of a global catastrophe. We are. People talk about the danger of a global catastrophe all the time, but actually the predominant narrative that you'll find is the danger is global warming, which is real, but is actually, I do not believe, the primary menace facing humanity. There are some people who still talk about resource exhaustion. That is not real, and because our resources are rapidly expanding, as I'll explain. But in fact, neither global warming nor resource depletion was the cause of the major disasters of the 20th century. They weren't, okay? Major disasters of the 20th century, World War I, World War II, all the Holocausts, were not caused by climate change. They were caused by something else entirely, which was bad ideas. And in particular, one bad idea, which came in a variety of forms. And what that bad idea was and remains is that there isn't enough for everyone, because there's only so much here. So either we're going to get it or they're going to get it. And so we have to kill them, because they're probably planning on killing us, because only one of us is going to get it. And if you look at the history, this is the fundamental idea which caused Europe to tear itself to pieces in 1914, even though Europeans had never had it so good. It was the idea that ultimately drove World War II as well. World War II also was set up by the havoc caused by World War I. But here's Hitler. Okay, the laws of existence require uninterrupted killing so that the better may live. Germany needs living space. What utter nonsense. Germany never needed living space. Germany today has less space than the Third Reich, a lot less space, and a higher population and a vastly higher standard of living. How that happened? It didn't happen by them invading other countries and killing people so they could steal their land and their cows. They were unsuccessful at that, and that would not have done very much for them had they been successful. It happened because of the advance of humanity as a whole, caused by global technological progress, to which people of many nations have contributed, including, yes, Germans for sure, but also people from many races they were trying to exterminate. Okay, so it was all nonsense. Okay, and yet people believe this shit, and people still believe it. Okay, I can tell you for a fact, because I have spoken to them, that there are people in the American national security establishment in positions of major responsibility who believe that war with China is inevitable. Why? Well, because there's 1.3 billion of them, and if they all started driving around cars like Americans and Europeans, there wouldn't be enough oil in the world. And you can bet your bottom dollar that they have opposite numbers in Beijing who look at this issue from the opposite side of the chessboard and think pretty much the same kind of thoughts. So if this kind of thinking is allowed to prevail, there will be war and we will destroy each other. And much more thoroughly than we did in the episodes of the 20th century, because our weaponry is far more effective. But it's nonsense. It's not, I mean, you take the Chinese, for example. Is the West harming them? No. The reason why China has progressed hugely in the past 30 years, especially, is because of Western technologies, that were invented in the West, from electricity through computers and everything else. But on the other hand, the reason why the West was able to develop in the first place was because of inventions made in China, like paper and printing. So, I mean, the real truth is that inventions made anywhere by anyone ultimately become available to everyone everywhere. And so it is not true that humans are in a struggle for existence over limited resources, that the different nations of the world are in a struggle for existence. It's completely false. The real truth is that humanity is a family, a disorderly family to be sure, but a disorderly family of nations engaged in a joint project to expand the human prospect. But people don't see that because they say, here's the earth, there's only so much here. How, well, it's not true there's only so much here, because the earth comes with an infinite sky. And if we work together, we can throw it wide open. And there's no reason to fight over provinces if you can create planets. Okay, and that's the case for space. So I'd be happy to take questions.
Thank you so much for an incredible talk, sir. That was really very informative. That I think you always do an amazing job of bringing kind of the emotional, metaphysical side to things into the argument for why space. Certainly that's how I think that comes across. I'm really sorry about the hacking event in the middle of your talk. As a result of that, we've muted everyone because we've no idea who's what.
Have them send in questions by chat and then recognize someone.
That's I think what we're going to do. There was one question that came in a little while ago. So Fabius asks, in terms of propulsion, which one are we going to use probably in the next spacecraft, possibly or more realistically? In your book, you mentioned different propulsion systems like electric propulsion, solar sails, magnetic sails, or fusion.
Well, in the immediate future, we're going to use chemical propulsion. Chemical propulsion will do the job of, for instance, getting humans to Mars. We can get people to Mars using chemical propulsion in 6 months. In fact, our recent space probes to Mars took 6 or 7 months to go there. So this is not the future, this is history. We go to Mars in 6 months. So Spirit and Opportunity took 6 months to reach Mars. Insight took 6 months to reach Mars. I think Perseverance took 7 months to reach Mars. Okay, and that's how long it took to sail from England to Australia in the 1800s. So people who are going places as colonists have and can do that. Now, if you're talking about the outer solar system, we need more advanced propulsion, okay? Because, 6 months to Mars is fine. 6 years to Saturn, that's a different situation altogether. So yes, in that case, we're looking at nuclear electric propulsion to start, but I think eventually fusion propulsion. I think, one thing about Mars, it's going to be a terrific engine for invention. And one of the things the Martians are going to be driven to invent, I believe, is fusion power. Fusion power, I mean, there's some interest in it for sure on Earth, but we have lots of other ways we can generate power here. Fossil fuels, solar power, hydro power, wind power. On Mars, there are no fossil fuels. You can make fuel, but you need energy to make it. There's no water power. The wind is too thin. The solar energy is only 40% as thick as Earth. So you want something better. And yes, you can certainly use nuclear power on Mars, but the making of nuclear fuels requires a very large, essentially, chemical industry to refine uranium out of ores, enrich it, so forth. But fusion requires deuterium fuel, and deuterium is actually present on Mars in all Martian hydrogen at 6 times the concentration as it is on Earth. And Martian life support systems are going to be electrolyzing water all the time for a number of reasons. So you'll have a constant source of deuterium. It'll be tremendously advantageous for Martians to create working fusion reactors, and so they will. And that's what we're going to see. And when you have fusion power, not only will that benefit the Earth, it'll solve global warming and all this stuff, but you can now talk about fusion rockets, and fusion rockets can have exhaust velocities up to 7% the speed of light. So now you're talking about not only a very powerful capability for outer solar system travel, you're talking about a starter capability for interstellar travel.
Well, thanks, sir. David is asking, hi, could you please talk about some of the economic opportunities that settling on Mars offers? What kind of industry could pop up there?
Okay.
Big one.
When settlers came to America, like the first one was Jamestown, they were looking for gold. Okay. Now, actually, there was no gold in Virginia. Okay. And the Pilgrims who came to Massachusetts are also looking for gold. Everybody's looking for gold. Okay. And the only place where in America, whichever colonization was supported by gold that was actually there was California. And even that ran out after a short amount of time. But once they came here, they created societies. And these actually became wealth generators themselves. Okay, first with products ranging from tobacco and then cotton from Virginia, and fish and timber from New England. But later on, even much more important were American inventions in terms of their value to the world. And I think that, there's no such thing as a natural resource. No such thing. There's only natural raw materials. It is people who turn materials into resources, human creativity. Okay, land was not a resource until people invented agriculture, and it became a more valuable resource as agricultural technology advanced. Oil was not a resource until we invented oil drilling and refining and machines that would actually run on the product. Okay, and uranium, of course, was not a resource till we invented nuclear energy. And deuterium is not a resource now, but it will be once we develop fusion power. I think that, okay, a Martian settlement is going to be an engine of invention. It's going to be a group of technologically adept people in a frontier environment where they're going to be forced to innovate in a number of areas. I've already mentioned one, fusion energy, but they're much broader. One thing you actually had in colonial America and frontier America was a labor shortage, which is why, by the way, pay was higher here, which was, of course, a strong motivator for people to want to move here. But it also was a strong motivator for the development of labor-saving machinery, which Americans became notorious for in the 19th century. And all sorts of machinery, including agricultural machinery. And we became a nation of gadgeteers, and with magazines for inventors and a patent office, which is like the National Lottery, and we generated Edisons and Fultons and so forth. And okay, now Mars colony is going to have a much more severe labor shortage than anything we experienced here. So you'll have a driver not only for labor-saving machinery and automation, but robotics and artificial intelligence, which is a way of multiplying the set of skills that's available. All these things, and then you're going to want, you'll have limited acreage to grow things in. So you're going to want ultra-productive crops, genetically modified to have 10 times the yield per square meter as you know, on Earth, you can just grow things in open fields. On Mars, you'll have these greenhouses much more restricted. So these sorts of innovations in robotics and genetically modified organisms in energy, these will be patentable, and they'll be able to license the patents on Earth and generate income by doing so. So I think the main export of Mars will be intellectual property.
Bright future for the bankers on Mars. Sean Preston asks, did you hear about the recent paper on putting zebrafish that are similar to humans, 70% DNA, into a state of hibernation, allowing them to withstand radiation far better? Could this have implications for deep space travel for humans or animals?
Well, it might. I can't answer that in detail, but well, it's not my field, but also certainly these sorts of investigations, and once again, investigations motivated to resist the radiation of spaceflight, I think is going to have value in the search for cures for cancer, and so forth on Earth, and vice versa. But it is by encountering these more challenging environments that you're forced to innovate in ways which then have repercussions, including providing solutions to other problems that you weren't willing to look far enough into.
Brilliant. And sorry to kind of hammer these. Have we got just to do a time check? How much longer kind of do you have to do questions?
All right, well, let's go till 1/4 the hour.
Okay, cool. So Ganju has a question. He says, what is your opinion on the role of additive manufacturing and the composite PLSY? I'm not sure if that, I don't know anything about additive manufacturing. I'm not sure if that was a typo, but in regards to developing space tech and when we consider the case of building the space stations.
Well, additive manufacturing is a very good example of this. Now, obviously, it's making a lot of progress because of its general utility, but additive manufacturing is a way to accomplish something that would otherwise require a large machine shop and potentially a fair number of skilled people. Now, if you have an additive manufacturing facility within a certain degree of limits, if you can draw it, you can make it. You can make very complex parts that would defy the ingenuity of machinists just by being able to draw it as a CAD and feeding it into the additive program. So once again, these things that deal with the problem of reducing the amount of labor and the diversity of required skills all tend to make space travel and space settlement much more feasible.
It's very interesting. Just choosing. So Shihan is asking, how about the future developments in UAVs with the antimatters for space technology with the Mars and other space travelings?
UAVs, I understand. Did the person mention antimatter in this context?
I'm not sure if Shian, if you want to rectify that in the chat, you're
Yes, sir.
welcome to.
I'm Shahan Vijay Singh. So I'm asking about that unmanned aerial aircraft industry related to the space traveling and also the antimatters. I have read some articles on antimatters. So as they said that we can use that antimatters in space traveling or in the future, not in the early future, in the far future.
All right, so let me try to answer. Those are two separate questions then. Look, unmanned aerial vehicles, we're testing out one on Mars right now, the Ingenuity helicopter. And I'm very excited about this. This program has now been successful, and it's expanding its demonstrations of success every week. It's now flown, I believe, 6 times, and each time it flies further and so forth. Look, we landed our first toy-sized Mars rover in 1997. That was Sojourner. It was the size of a toy car. Now we've got rovers on Mars the size of real cars. And so now we have a helicopter on Mars the size of a toy helicopter. It's not too much to imagine that, 10 years from now, we'll have helicopters on Mars, this comparable to the Spirit and Opportunity rovers. And that 30 years from now, we'll have helicopters on Mars that the size of human flight helicopters. But certainly drone helicopters, that is, if you increase Ingenuity by 1 order of magnitude, I believe this is, could be wrong. It's either, I think it's 2 kilograms is what it is. But if we go to 20 kilogram or 100 kilogram size helicopters, these could be extremely capable aerial reconnaissance vehicles. Able to, the rovers go 200 meters in a day. A proper helicopter could easily go 200 kilometers in a day. So that's 1,000 times further and not be stopped by any terrain obstacles, boulder fields, canyons, rifts, any of this stuff. In fact, it could go into a canyon, land in the bottom of the canyon, do a little exploration and fly out of the canyon. So these are going to be enormous aids. People sometimes ask me, once we have people on Mars, will we still need rovers like Curiosity? And the answer is no. But helicopters, yeah. The reason is that the wheeled rovers are, of course, very useful now because we don't have people there. But once you have people on Mars, a human certainly won't be limited to 200 meters in a day. A human could probably, especially on a electric all-terrain vehicle, could easily travel 20 kilometers in a day. But once again, the helicopter could do 200. So just as we use aerial drones for reconnaissance for military forces right now, for infantry and so forth, they're going to be very useful in combined operations with astronauts once we're there. Now, the other question had to do was antimatter. Now, antimatter, you should understand, is not a source of energy, is a means of storing energy because you have to make it. Okay, now, right now, the efficiency of making antimatter is like 10 to the minus 6 or something. That is, it takes 1 million joules of energy to create 1 joule's worth of antimatter. So it's an extremely inefficient way to store energy. However, let's say we could improve that by 5 orders of magnitude or so, and now it's only 10%. You could store 1 joule for every 10 that you had to generate, and you had a very abundant source of energy, for example, fusion power, then you could store that energy in the form of antimatter. And of course, you'd have to master antimatter storage, which is not yet there. But if you could do that, then you've got an extremely compact and lightweight form of energy storage. And now, instead of fusion rockets going at 10% the speed of light, one could imagine antimatter rockets going at 50% the speed of light. And so the antimatter is further out in the future. than fusion, but it's certainly within the laws of physics that we could make use of antimatter propulsion.
Awesome. Can I just jump in there on the UAV point? You advocate a few times across your literature for balloons.
Yeah.
On Mars. Would you, just on the off, I'm not sure if this is a leading question, but would you be more willing to advocate for unmanned balloons to kind of drift through the Martian atmosphere and do general surface scanning operations, or would you rather have less range but more accuracy of destination with
I'd like to have both. The balloons, the Martian balloons would travel about 100 kilometers an hour, and in 24 hours, that's 2,400 kilometers. If you use super pressure balloons, which is the type that I favor, they don't ever have to land. They could fly for months and do surveys, and also you map out the Martian winds that way as well at the same time. So I'm all for Mars balloon missions, but the helicopter has now gotten there first, as it were. And so, for instance, there's alternative concepts. I've had an interest for a while in rocket hoppers and so forth, and these are all possible too. But it looks like the first out of the gate is the helicopter, and I think we're going to see, here was a 2-kilogram helicopter, which literally was like a stowaway on the mission. It was forced its way into the mission, through the side door. It wasn't really part of the mission plan, but these guys managed to get on board somehow. And now that this has been a success, I mean, just think of the superior capability of a Mars helicopter compared to a wheeled rover. So I think this decade will certainly see Martian helicopters with 1 to 2 orders of magnitude larger mass and much greater capability, including, of course, the capability of carrying instruments and maybe the capability of carrying small rovers. So you fly somewhere, you let loose your little Sojourner sized rover to go do the surface investigation, and then you call it back, grab it, and fly it somewhere else. Such a mission would be able to investigate numerous widely separated sites compared to our current missions, which you decide where you're going to go, and that's where you're going. Mars is a big place. Well, you take the most capable rovers, Curiosity and Perseverance, maybe in their time on Mars, they'll travel 20, 30 kilometers. The distance a person could walk in a day. Imagine trying to explore the Earth with doing one hike every, 6 years, of 20 kilometers duration. You're really not going to get to see much of the world. Helicopters are coming.
Very good. Thank you for answering that, sir. Sam Ross is asking, in your position between Pioneer Astronautic, the Mars Society, and all of your advocacy, you're in an almost unique position to assess the current state of technology needed for space settlement. We've seen a lot of development in the past few years on the immediate critical path for settlement, the transport system, but also power generation and storage, scientific instruments, etc. What do you see as the next key problems that no one is working on right now? Space agriculture, ECLSS, early stages ISRU, architecture, automated construction, just to name a few.
Well, all those are important things. Okay, my greatest interest is in ISRU because, once again, things are not resources in themselves. It is human ingenuity that turns materials into resources. So, the moon and Mars just look like a bunch of dirt. Okay, Mars also has some ice, but it doesn't seem particularly rich. But you then look at it and you say, well, gee, that water has got much more parts deuterium than Earth water. It's an energy source. The Mars is red because it's iron oxide. It makes steel. Of course, oxygen, and of course the CO2 in the atmosphere. On Earth, everybody is uptight. We got too much CO2. Well, CO2 is also a resource, obviously. It is one of the fundamental resources of the biosphere. And it can also, if you bring an energy source to Mars, it along with water becomes a resource that you can use to make fuels. Obviously, you can also use it to grow plants and therefore food. You could make plastics, clothing, fabrics, all these sorts of things. But these kinds of technologies, there's aluminum oxide on Mars. It can make aluminum. I mean, we have to create versions of technologies that we have put to use on Earth to create all the things you see around you. Almost nothing you see around you was here in the state of nature. We have to be able to do this stuff. Got to be able to make bricks, and the stuff on Mars is there to do that too. There's clays. But this whole array of craft that allows us to support ourselves as modern people need to be created to allow us to settle Mars. Because once you can turn the materials in your environment into resources, then that environment becomes habitable for you.
Thank you, sir. Fahim is asking, so humans are negatively affecting the Earth through deforestation, climate change, etc. How are humans going to negatively impact Mars, and how do we slow this impact?
I don't believe that humans are going to negatively impact Mars. I believe that humans are going to very positively impact Mars. The question of whether humans have negatively impacted the Earth is, okay, there's grounds to argue that. There's grounds to argue exactly the opposite. Most of the places that people inhabit now on Earth were once much less healthy. Mosquitoes, diseases in the water, and so on, very dangerous predators. Now, you could say, well, aesthetically, I prefer wilderness, although you couldn't actually live there. Or not for long, put it that way. And you wouldn't be able to enjoy it very much unless you had a return ticket. But I'll grant you, nevertheless, that there was something here of enormous aesthetic value in terms of the Earth's majestic wilderness before it was affected by humans with their agriculture and their cities and all these things. But there isn't on Mars. There isn't. It is barren. There may well be life underground on Mars in the form of microbes in the groundwater. But if we were to replace that with a true biosphere comparable to what we have on Earth, okay, with, yes, forests and also orchards, with meadows and, yes, also fields of corn, and some wild animals, but also dogs and cats, and cities with excellent used bookstores. I really don't think there'd be much ground for aesthetic complaint.
That's a very interesting standpoint, sir. So thank you for the answer. Surav is asking, what do you think about on-orbit manufacturing? Would it be a way forward to deep space exploration?
Well, on-orbit manufacturing, well, there's two different issues there. There's on-orbit manufacturing as a proposition for a development of space industry. And then there is in support of space, that is in support of space industry to meet the terrestrial market, or on-orbit manufacturing in support of space exploration itself. Now, on-orbit manufacturing to produce products for sale on Earth is possible. They have to be very high value things and things that need either zero gravity or very hard vacuum to facilitate their manufacture. And there are such things. Now, and with the lowering of cost of space launch that we're going to see from Starship, those become increasingly probable and viable. I don't agree. I think the statements made by, for instance, Jeff Bezos, that we're going to move Earth industry into space and make the Earth a garden, is ridiculous. We're not going to move steel mills into orbit and have to transport up the ore and the coal and bring the steel back. I mean, that's just stupid, okay? But there certainly are items, and people have made in zero gravity extremely superior fiber optic cables. There are drugs that have been made in zero gravity orbit. There are things whose manufacture could require extremely hard vacuum. It's virtually impossible to create a vacuum on Earth that is as good as space. And who knows, even fusion reactors, where the biggest expense is the large vacuum vessel, much easier to create in space. Now, so I think there's certainly specialty items that could support an economy in Earth orbit or free space for sale at the terrestrial market, although it will not allow us to deindustrialize the Earth. It will just be a way where certain products can be made that cannot be made on Earth. Now, in terms of making things for space, there are certain things that one could imagine. For instance, what they call gossamer structures, solar sails made out of asteroidal material, that things that could be very vast in size and flimsy, giant reflectors for giant space telescopes, things that you could never, you may or may not be able to make them on Earth, but you certainly couldn't launch them. But to manufacture these sorts of things in space becomes possible as well. So there are a number of technologies like that, solar sails, optics, radio dishes, that there are on truly large scales are advantageous to make in space for space.
Thank you for your answer, sir. Richard is asking, are you aware of any possible schemes to protect humans from radiation on the Martian surface? Earth's magnetic field is such a blessing, so that people don't have to hide underground 90% of the time.
Okay, there's a misunderstanding that many people have that the Earth's magnetic field is what protects us from space radiation. It isn't. It's the Earth's atmosphere that protects us from space radiation. Now, some of the space radiation is blocked by the magnetic field, that's solar flares, but they would also be blocked by the atmosphere even more effectively. You have on top of you right now the equivalent of 10 meters of water of mass shielding you from space. And believe me, that's a lot better shield than the Earth's magnetic field. Okay, so it's mass that provides shielding. Now, the Mars Society recently had a contest for people to design a 1 million person Mars city-state. And we had 176 entries from all over the world. And the top 20, we published in the form of a book, which is now out, available in both electric and paper form on Amazon, Mars city-states. And these include many designs because they had to take into account all technical issues, but also economic and aesthetic issues. Because you don't want people living, I mean, sure, people could live in the London Underground, and they'd be perfectly, if you had a London Underground on Mars, people could live in it and they'd be perfectly shielded from radiation. Okay, but you probably want a more desirable living situation. Now, one idea that a number of these entrants came up with was using water shielding and literally, as it were, having your fish farm in the roof above you. And the light is coming in, so you have light. Light can certainly penetrate 10 meters of water without difficulty. If you've ever dove 33 feet, 10 meters, and things are perfectly lit up. So you could have your fish farm above you and be well shielded against cosmic rays, and also have fish to both watch and eat, maybe even zebrafish. Now, as well as larger varieties. But that was one idea. I published something in the Journal of the British Interplanetary Society about putting a colony under the surface of the crater lakes with a layer of ice and then a layer of water above you. And then you'd have water environment, you go swimming. Would also provide pressure. You could, yes, you could do things underground, or you could do tunnel into Martian glaciers, ice walls, or you could have something. The more conventional ideas that people have been cities that were largely underground, but with domed areas above them, where you'd have natural sunlight. These would be your farms up there, and you could go up there. And yes, you take some radiation dose while you're there, but the radiation dose on the Martian surface is about the same as the International Space Station. So provided you spent most of your time underground and then came up to the surface, every now and then. I mean, how much time do you actually spend outdoors? Right now, well, it varies from person to person, but even people with outdoor jobs probably only spend 8 hours a day outdoors. And most of us spend a lot less time than that outdoors. Sure. I think having underground colonies would not be that oppressive if you had the opportunity to go up and outside frequently.
That's a really amazing answer, sir. And that I'd also point out that the winners from that from the Mars City escape competition are actually on the call. The guys from Nexus Aurora, Sam Ross, amongst others, who are also members of our society, just to give them a little bit of limelight.
All
but
right. And their design is in the book, along with many other good designs.
So I'm kind of very curious, aware of time, and kind of I had a big kind of question burning just rereading The Case for Mars recently. If you were to go back and do, if you were in your position as you were in whatever at Martin Marietta, working on Mars Direct today with the technology that's available today, and the advances we've made, would you still advocate the same mission architecture type of the kind of 10-year 2-vehicle approach to Mars, and getting humans to Mars and back as a way of building up a base, or would you do it a different way with current technology?
Well, okay. I actually published a paper on this. I think you might be able to find it on the Pioneer Astronautics website, Mars Direct 2.0. Published in 2019. Now there I advocated for using a mini Starship. Because now you should understand that my thinking in Mars Direct had been oriented towards exploration and then evolved towards settlement, whereas Musk's thinking is settlement. Okay, and so it's clear that if you're talking about exploration and you're talking about being able to visit a fair number of sites before you decide on where you're going to put your settlement, that a smaller return vehicle than Starship is in order. I mean, not that you can't use Starship, but if you need 1,000 tons of propellant instead of 100 tons of propellant means your power requirement on Mars is up by an order of magnitude, and so on. As I say, Musk's answer is, well, I'll have the capability to deliver it. But I believe that having ships in two sizes is a significant advantage. The Starship, I mean, just put it simply, it's suboptimal as a return vehicle because it weighs so much. Even if you're doing colonization, why do you want to return such a big thing? Most of the colonists are only going one way. That's what colonization is. So only the pilots coming back. And if you delivered something as valuable and useful as a Starship to Mars, landed it on Mars, now you got an apartment house on Mars. Why do you want to send that back to Earth? You have a lot of apartment buildings here already. So I would prefer, it's like, the Navy, they got different size ships for different purposes. So I think it would be useful. Now, of course, Musk is operating with a considerable but nevertheless limited development budget, and he'd prefer to develop only one thing. I think myself developing a smaller model would also, you'd save a lot on, for instance, the development of a multi-megawatt nuclear reactor that's needed to support Starship instead of a 100 kilowatt nuclear reactor. In other words, there's trades in everything, but certainly the success of Starship has would greatly move my thinking in the direction of reusable systems. You should realize when I did Mars Direct, the only example of a reusable system was the space shuttle, and it was clearly outclassed by the expendable systems we used in Apollo. I'd much rather have a Saturn V as a launch vehicle than a space shuttle. And the at 7 times the lift capability, albeit with the same takeoff thrust. In other words, there was an enormous price for reusability, and the benefit of reusability was not apparent because while the shuttle had advertised itself as flying 40 times a year, in other words, that was the rationale. Let's get rid of the Saturn V's. We'll have shuttles. We'll fly them every week. The reality was the most it ever flew was 8 times in a year, and the average is 4 times a year. And a reusable launch system with those kinds of launch rates is unattractive. You'd better have expendables. Now, what Musk is talking about is a different concept of operations. I don't know if people have seen, I had this article in Nautilus magazine online. It's posted on my Twitter feed in some places, but I'm sure you can find it, in which I discuss this. Okay, Musk's idea with his reusables, first of all, he's not going to have 4 of them. He anticipates having hundreds, okay, and having frequent flight rates. But let's back off a little. Musk is always kind of talks a bigger game than he can quite do, but still does a lot. Let's say at 20 Starships, and let's say he can turn them each around once a month. Okay, well, that's 240 flights in a year. That's a very different proposition from 4 flights in a year. Okay, and if you have a certain standing army, as the shuttle did, to support the flight operations, so they cost $4 billion a year to maintain the shuttle workforce. If you have 4 shuttles, it's basically costing you $1 billion a flight, even though replacing the external tank only costs $35 million. Okay. Now, on the other hand, first of all, Starship is in certain ways a simpler system than the shuttle. Talk about a $1 billion a year payroll, and now you're flying 200 and let's make it even 250 flights in a year. Well, that'd be $4 million a flight. Okay, and so that's just a different thing. So if you want to get the benefits of reusability, you got to reuse something a lot. Okay, you know, if a reusable rocket costs 10 times as much as an expendable rocket, you got to use it at least 10 times to break even. If you use it 100 times, well, then you're better off by a factor of 10. If you use it 1,000, you know, so forth. So his concept is very frequent reuse. And, you know, they've been evolving this concept of operations with the Falcons. The Falcons right now are flying about every 10 days. And the something just incredible. And they want to do something more incredible. And they're on their way. So 3 cheers for the Musketeers.
Thank you for, I know we said quarter past, so it's probably not very expedient to ask another question, but thank you so much for an amazing talk, sir. And I know you asked, when we talked the other day, you asked for a plug for, well, it's probably better that you do it, for the conference and for your new book.
Right. The conference is this October 14th through 17th. It's a teleconference, so people can attend it from England just as easily as from California. And there's an open call for papers right now. So we're encouraging people to submit abstracts. It's an online form that you fill out at marssociety.org.
Amazing.
And get involved with the Mars Society UK, because history is not a spectator sport. It happens because people make it happen. Be one of those who make it happen.
Thank you so much, sir, for a really incredibly informative, kind of wonderfully untechnical evening, kind of very accessible. I hope that when people are watching this back, it's kind of accessible to everyone. That's kind of, I think, a beautiful thing about Mars, and particularly your advocacy, is that it takes the emotional argument and adds it to possibilities. But thank you so much for making the time, coming to speak to us.
All right. Okay. Good talking to you.
Well, thanks, sir.
Okay. Thank you.